In the town of Alder Hollow, mornings arrived quietly. They did not rush in with noise or urgency. They unfolded slowly across the river like pale silver fabric, drifting between rooftops and chimneys before settling gently into the narrow streets. Even the bells of the chapel tower seemed to understand the rhythm of the place. They rang not to command attention, but simply to remind everyone that time, like the river, was always moving forward whether anyone noticed or not. Elias Mercer noticed. He always noticed. He noticed the way the mist curled low along the water in early spring. He noticed how the market square changed color, depending on which flowers were in bloom. He noticed the subtle shift in the sound of footsteps when rain had fallen overnight. Most of all, he noticed the roads. Or, rather, he noticed where the roads should have been. Elias was a mapmaker, though not the sort whose maps ended up folded inside ship captains' coats or pinned to the walls of royal offices. His maps were smaller, quieter. They belonged to gardeners, travelers, walkers, and people who preferred to know where a path might lead before they followed it. His workshop stood at the edge of Alder Hollow, just where the last row of houses gave way to tall grasses and the narrow footpath that followed the riverbank north. The building had once been a storage shed for fishing nets. Elias had kept the wide doors, but replaced the roof beams and windows. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves holding rolled parchment tied with twine. Ink jars sat in careful rows along the central work table, each labeled in his neat handwriting. Morning light entered the workshop from the eastern window and spread across his maps as if trying to read them. Elias was already awake long before the first bell rang. He stood beside the window with a cup of tea cooling slowly in his hand and watched the river. Something about it looked different. He could not yet say what. The river itself appeared unchanged. It moved with its usual calm determination, neither hurried nor slow. The reeds along the bank bent the same way they always did when the breeze traveled downstream. And yet, he set the cup aside. There was a color in the mist he did not recognize. Not brighter, not darker, just unfamiliar. Elias frowned slightly, then reached for his notebook. He wrote a single line. Morning mist carries a faint gold tone near the northern bend. He closed the notebook immediately afterward. Most people would have ignored such a detail. Elias never did. By mid-morning, Alder Hollow had fully awakened. Market stalls opened one by one beneath striped canvas awnings. Bakers carried trays of bread through the square. Children crossed the narrow bridge, in small groups, on their way to the schoolhouse beside the orchard road. Elias walked through all of it with his satchel slung over one shoulder and a rolled map tucked beneath his arm. He stopped, as he always did, beside the fountain at the center of the square, not because he needed water, because the fountain marked the exact middle of town. Every map needed a center. He placed the rolled parchment on the stone edge and unfastened the twine. The map unfolded smoothly beneath his hands. It showed the northern walking paths beyond Alder Hollow, including the small wooded ridge locals simply called the Old Forest. Except now there was something missing, or perhaps something new. Elias leaned closer. A narrow marking had appeared near the edge of the parchment. He stared at it. He had not drawn that line. Mapmakers knew their own work the way musicians knew their instruments. Every curve, every angle, every hesitation in the ink belonged to memory as much as to the hand. This line did not belong to him. It was faint but precise, extending from the northern bend of the river toward the interior of the forest, toward a place where no road existed. Elias carefully rolled the parchment closed again. He did not tell anyone what he had seen. Instead, he returned to his workshop, gathered a fresh pencil, a compass, and a second notebook, and set out along the river path. The northern trail was not difficult to follow. It curved gently between alder trees whose roots drank steadily from the shallow edges of the water. Birds moved through the branches above him in small shifting groups, their calls echoing softly between trunks. Elias walked slowly, not because he was uncertain, because careful walking allowed the landscape to speak. The mist he had noticed earlier still lingered ahead, and now he could see it clearly. The golden tone was real. It shimmered faintly between the trees, not like sunlight, like memory. He paused. The path beneath his boots changed texture. Packed earth gave way to softer ground layered with old leaves. The forest here was older than the rest, taller, quieter. Elias checked his map again. According to everything he had ever recorded, the walking path ended here. But the faint line on the parchment continued forward. So he did too. He walked for nearly half an hour before he saw it. At first he thought it was simply a reflection caught between branches. Then he realized the light was steady, golden, patient, waiting. It hung in the air several steps ahead of him, suspended beside the trunk of a tall ash tree. A lantern, old-fashioned, glass-sided, burning without smoke. Elias stopped where he stood. No one in Alder Hollow had mentioned a lantern in the old forest. No hunters had reported one. No travelers had marked one on any road. And yet it was here, lit, as if someone had just placed it there. He stepped closer. The lantern did not flicker. Its light did not move with the wind. Instead, it seemed to shine inward as much as outward, illuminating something he could not quite see. Elias reached out carefully. The handle was warm, not hot, not cold, exactly the temperature of a hand waiting to be held. And the moment his fingers touched it, the forest changed. Not dramatically, not suddenly, quietly, as if something far away had just begun to listen. Behind him, the path he had followed no longer looked the same. Ahead of him, a new one had appeared, and somewhere deeper among the trees, something answered the lantern's light with another glow of its own. Elias lifted the lantern slightly. He did not yet know where the path would lead, but he already understood one thing clearly. This road had been waiting for him, long before he ever thought to look for it, and now that he had found it, it would not let him turn back easily. He lifted the lantern a little higher. The light spread softly between the trunks of the trees, not bright enough to startle the forest, only enough to reveal where to place his next step. And so Elias followed. He walked slowly, listening. The forest answered in small ways. Leaves shifted overhead. A branch settled somewhere in the distance. A bird called once, then again more quietly, as if recognizing that something gentle had entered its morning. After several minutes, the path widened. It did not become a road. It became a clearing. At the center of the clearing stood a wooden bench, old, but carefully kept. No moss covered its surface. No leaves rested on its seat. It looked as though someone had been there only moments before. Elias set the lantern beside him and sat down. For the first time since leaving the town, he allowed himself to rest. The forest did not feel unfamiliar anymore. It felt patient, as if it had been waiting not only for him to arrive, but also for him to pause. He closed his eyes briefly. The air carried the faint scent of warm bark and distant water. And somewhere ahead, deeper still among the trees, he thought he heard footsteps. Not hurried, not hidden, simply walking, approaching at the same calm pace he had chosen himself. When he opened his eyes again, someone stood at the far edge of the clearing. An older woman. She wore a long gray coat, the color of river stones after rain. In one hand, she carried a folded map. In the other, nothing at all. She smiled as though she had expected him. "You found the lantern," she said softly. Her voice sounded like pages turning in a quiet room. Elias nodded. "I think it found me," he answered. The woman seemed pleased by this reply. "Yes," she said, "it usually does." She walked closer, unhurried, and sat beside him on the bench as though they had arranged to meet their days before. For a while neither of them spoke. The silence felt natural, comfortable, shared. At last she unfolded her map and placed it gently between them. The paper was older than any Elias had seen, not fragile, just experienced. Lines crossed it in quiet patterns that did not match rivers or hills or borders he recognized. They looked more like memories than directions. "This forest," she said, "is larger than it appears from the outside." Elias studied the map. "How long has the lantern been here?" The woman tilted her head slightly, considering. "Long enough," she said, "for people to forget why it was lit." She turned the map slowly. One of the faint lines on the page began to glow. It matched the lantern's color exactly. Warm, steady, kind. "And now?" Elias asked. "Now," she said gently, "it has begun again." She folded the map once more and handed it to him. "You should keep this." Elias hesitated. "I don't know where it leads." "That is why it is yours," she replied. He accepted it. The paper felt lighter than expected, as though most of its weight belonged to the places it described rather than the page itself. The woman stood. "Walk until the lantern grows brighter," she said. "Then rest again. The forest will show you the next part when it is ready." "Will I see you again?" Elias asked. She smiled the same quiet smile as before. "Yes," she said, "but not always in the same place." Then she stepped beyond the clearing, and the forest received her without a sound. Elias remained seated for a few moments longer. He did not feel alone. He did not feel lost. He felt exactly where he needed to be. At last he stood, lifted the lantern once more, and followed the softly glowing line that had appeared on the map. The path ahead curved gently between the trees, and somewhere far beyond the branches, the river could still be heard moving steadily toward places he had never seen. Elias walked toward that sound, not quickly, not slowly, simply forward, and the forest walked with him,